All right, so we're today looking at part 4 of the Dangers of First Fruits of Zion. It was the Messiah podcast from February 9th, 2024, which is supposed to be a rebuttal of critics, a response to those like myself who have raised concerns about the things that are being taught by this organization. If you haven't seen the first 3 parts, that will help give you context, but it's okay if you start right here. We'll jump in. So Jacob's talking about themselves. It's kind of weird in the quote because he's projecting what other people are saying that they're saying, and asking if it's accurate. So just get with it. You'll see. Stick with it. You'll see. So it sounds like what they're saying is that all the stuff we read about in the New Testament is just more Judaism. It's not a reboot, a restart, or erase and try again. And the primary difference from the other expressions of Judaism at the time was they believed Jesus was the Messiah. Do you think that's a fair characterization of what we think of, I guess, what most people would call the early church? Yeah, I do. I think that's correct. So, as has been demonstrated, First Fruits of Zion's leaders believe that Christianity and the church were never meant to exist. Jesus didn't found a religion. Jesus didn't want to create the church. Neither did the apostles. They have said that plain as day in many cases. And now we see that they're marrying that belief. They're putting that intent belief together with a very incredulous reading. I mean, this is not an honest reading of the New Testament, where neither of them do exist. So their thesis, their teaching is that in the New Testament, there is no church, there is no Christianity. They do not exist. The only thing that you have in the New Testament is a sect of Judaism, by design and by purpose. So take that for what you will. It's not true. And I've shown it with a study of the book of Acts. You could find it in Paul's letters. He's dealing with something that's real, that actually exists. But this is the stance they're going to take on this. All right, here we have an odd argument from Boaz. He says it's impossible for God to change. So the idea that God would start one religion, Judaism, and then later decide it wasn't working out, salvation was too hard to achieve, he was lonely, everybody was a sinner, all these type of things. And so he needed to start another religion, a new one. This doesn't sit well with the idea that God does not change. So this argument that Boaz is making would be sad to see someone who's supposed to be leading a big organization, right? That it's not, that God doesn't change, so therefore his plans can't change. That would be sad if this wasn't such a dangerous movement. So God does not change. You are correct there. But that doesn't mean that God's plans and purposes are static and never develop further. Right? So here's the weird thing, right? First Fruits of Zion wants to freeze God's plans and purposes at Sinai. They can never develop or change after that, right? They have to be all in that prism, in that lens. That is the moment. But the Torah itself proves that his view is false. Right? The law of Moses itself would not exist under this melding of God's nature and God's plans together, because he didn't give the law of Moses to Adam and Eve. So how can God change? He didn't give the law of Moses to Noah. So how can God change and give Abraham something different? He didn't give the law of Moses to Abraham. So how can God change? Right? This you can't be consistent with this theory if you allow God's plans and purposes to change and to develop and to be further revealed as they are in Genesis. All the way up until Moses at Sinai, and then you say, stop! You can't do anything else. This is what it's going to be forever. It just doesn't make any sense. So note the line, right? Note when he said, and then later decide it wasn't working out, salvation was too hard to achieve. That's in reference to the law of Moses, right? That's sort of like a conclusion about the law of Moses. That's either Boaz misunderstanding the purpose of the law, which if it's true, I would be, that's pretty bad. Or he's throwing out another straw man at the church. Those are supposed objections of how the church views the law of Moses, but that's not the way it is, right? The law of Moses, we know and we teach that the law of Moses accomplished exactly what God intended. Salvation of souls was never on the table at all. There was no mechanism in the law of Moses to save souls. That's not what it was about. The primary goal, in case you're wondering, was to prepare the way for the Messiah by showing Israel and Israel's neighbors the character, the nature of God. What kind of God did Israel have? So that when the Messiah came, they would understand him. They would accept him, which it did. Right? The law of Moses did that. Whether Israel obeyed and they received blessings, and that showed what kind of God is, or they disobeyed and they received curses, and that also showed what kind of God is. The law of Moses did not fail. So if Boaz Michael is teaching, is trying to insinuate here that the church thinks that, largely we don't. You can find some that say that, but that's not what's being taught. I hope that's all this is another straw man, like all the others. All right, so Jacob says, people can think that we're saying that the church is wrong and the church is in error, and maybe like the church has been lying to us, because how could they not know this? They must know this, and so they're hiding the truth. And I think it's primarily an emotional response where someone feels like they've been misled by someone they've trusted and by an authority figure, and that they're not sure what to do with that feeling. So let me add Boaz's response. It comes a couple minutes later that he gets back to that idea, but it belongs here. It's a conspiracy theory, he says, that some people fall into that begin to embrace these ideas that the church is suppressing truth or the church is lying to people. And honestly, we discourage people from going down that road. All right, so Daniel says that some people feel betrayed, lied to by the church when they learn the quote-unquote truth that First Fruits of Zion is peddling. And Boaz says, hey, we discourage that. We don't want people to think the church is lying to you. All right, I don't buy that at all, because I see what you do, and we'll respond to that in a minute. But let me just show you one very powerful instance where they are promoting a conspiracy theory, a very dangerous one about the church, or at least about the Protestant church, right? The five solae of the Reformation. This is it from page 2, the introduction to Rethinking the Five Solae by Jacob Franzik, who is on this podcast. He says that they are themselves the root of Protestant anti-Semitism. So Jacob Franzik wrote a book that First Fruits of Zion published that espouses the conspiracy theory, because it's not true, it's not based in reality, but the conspiracy theory that Protestant theology at its heart is the source of modern anti-Semitism. Now, history will show you that anti-Semitism was already around and had really gotten its start during the Crusades, but okay. And that as they are normally understood. So Jacob Franzik is saying, as they are normally understood, are designed to exclude Jews as much as Catholics from any definition of true and biblical religion. So Jacob Franzik wrote a book that is throwing Protestantism, the entire movement, under the bus, under that conspiracy theory. So why do we get the impression that, or why would people who read your materials, who go to Torah clubs, end up with a hostile and betrayed attitude towards the church? People get that impression when they listen to what you say and read what you write. Right? Your ongoing hostility towards everything the church has taught, and saying the church has an incomplete gospel, saying the church, as Jacob Franzik did in his quote-unquote rebuttal video about the video that I made with the Biblical Roots channel, saying that the church doesn't teach repentance. You say this kind of thing about the church and people are going to get a negative attitude, especially when it's based on straw men. and red herrings and all sorts of things like that. This attitude towards the church and Christianity, which again, you said are not supposed to exist, were never meant to exist, doesn't exist in the New Testament. I mean, you say these things, what are people going to think? How are they going to feel when you tell them that they were raised in a tradition that God did not want, that does not properly honor God because it's not Torah observant? All of these things. When you say these things, what are you expecting people to respond with? You know, I've had people come at me and say, why do you care about this? Why does this matter to you? I mean, right here, right? This attitude towards the church and Christianity is turbocharged by the fact, and it is a fact, and I've shown the quotes where they say they're doing it, that the first fruits of Zion and the church is, by the fact that to the first fruits of Zion, the church is the mission field. This isn't about winning the lost to the gospel. This is about taking people who are a part of the church and telling them that they've learned it wrong, and you will tell them what is right. And you're going to bring them into a fellowship where they learn what is right. What do you think the natural response of that is going to be? It's going to start to weaken their connection to the church. And we have seen over and over again that people begin down this path, and eventually, over time, they become more and more Torah observant, and they become less and less connected to the church. This is just what happens. Not for everybody, but it is built into this setup. What else could happen? All right, now Boaz says this: it brings me great joy to see the diversity of the churches that our resources are utilized in. Our Torah clubs are in all different forms of denominations, and people are beginning to learn and to understand their faith from a Jewish perspective. We made it a part of our culture not to bring condemnation to the church. Okay, because I don't really know what to say about that. It's not the truth. It's not the truth. We've made it a part of our culture not to bring condemnation to the church. Now, I think I know what they mean. I think they mean that because they don't, go after Tim Keller by name on one end, on one place on the evangelical perspective, or John MacArthur by name. Right, because they're not singling out names and interacting with specific teachings from churches ever. Right, they never do that. That it's not condemning the church, I guess. But again, the church has an incomplete gospel. The church doesn't teach repentance. The church fathers early church fathers were all anti-Semites who took the church away from the truth. I mean, you say this stuff. You teach this stuff, right? So what are people supposed to think? Boaz, and later on, says the negative other, right, gives us the ability to justify who we are and that we're more righteous, we're more holy, or we understand the Bible better. And let me pause. He's correct. When you other your opponents, that's a very dangerous thing. It's a challenge for me, right? Because I'm trying to oppose this organization and what they're doing and the harm that they're causing, but I don't want to other them. And hopefully I have not. I've never consciously diminished their humanity or said that they were going to hell or anything like that. So, continuing, so, we stand against the development of a negative other. And I think our resources will prove that, in the sense that you don't see us posturing ourselves against particular dogma. We present the Bible from a Jewish perspective, and at times that brings challenge, but it's all with the intention of bringing people into a proper relationship with the land, the people, and the scriptures of Israel. So we don't other the church. We don't posture against the church. We, as he says, just present the proper relationship. So I can appreciate publicly saying sometimes that you don't think you're more righteous, more holy, or understand the Bible better. But by the end of the paragraph, as is typical, you've undermined that. when you said we're the ones that show the proper relationship with the land, the people, and the scriptures of Israel. We're the ones that are correcting everything that the church has done wrong for 2,000 years. So when you have a radical stance that seeks to overturn the entirety of church history, it's going to lead exactly where you expect it to, right? When you lead a movement that says up until right now, nobody had the truth, more or less, and no one's known it and taught it for 2,000 years, and you are part of a movement or the tip of the spear or whatever of correcting that error, people are going to think that buy into that they are more righteous, more holy, and they understand the Bible better, because you have said that the law of Moses is eternal and still operative. You have said that Jews are obligated to the mitzvot of the law of Moses. You have said that Gentile followers of Jesus are obligated to the Torah in a different way. But you're saying we all, again, what else should we believe? All right, so that's the end of part 4. So they're saying we don't promote conspiracy theories. We don't promote antagonism towards the church. We don't think we're better. But that's what your teaching leads to, right? When you teach something, the results of it, over time, that matters. And we have to ask ourselves questions about that. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm saying, this is not just some small correction or adjustment. You're saying the church doesn't have the gospel, not the full gospel. The full gospel is all about Torah keeping. Jesus only came to call people back to Torah keeping. I mean, when you say these things, people are going to think that the church is lying to them. People are going to think that being a part of the church doesn't do them much good anymore when they buy into to what you're selling. All right, so we'll stop there. There's one more part to go. That'll come out when I record that one as well. Thank you, and God bless.